Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video gaming podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of Gaming Outside the Algorithm, my solo cast about video games and the video games industry from a perspective outside the Twitter, YouTube circuit, and algorithmically driven social media. This is episode number 3, which I hope goes up around Sunday, 11 January 2026. Today we'll be talking about the DIY market and RAM prices, the Xbox Developer Direct, and other Xbox dynamics, 007 First Light recommended specs dropping, and other topics. We'll get started here shortly. Thanks so much for stopping by. Hey, what's up, everybody? Let's get started with segment 1 of today's show. The first topic that I wanted to talk about was a lot of it's a continuing conversation that it started a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last episode, about the DIY market and kind of everybody's discussion, or maybe some of the popular theories that I see running around about RAM prices. So I wrote this article earlier this week. Cheap RAM was the anomaly, not the rule. This is an article over on my blog, which is 10 keyless over on the Rounding Off Infinity gaming portal. Again, cheap RAM was the anomaly, not the rule. Consumer DIY RAM prices peaked in 2018 and then fell to all-time lows, rising in 2020 and then stabilizing up to about 2022, remaining steady ever since. The current sticker shock in 2025-2026 is more about feeling disrupted after a historical period of unprecedented value, but these prices, or rather the super cycle of consumer DIY RAM kits, is not new, and so that notion of super cycle is an important thing to note. While RAM prices have historically fluctuated, the current sticker shock in early 2026 represents a significant surge in comparison to the last 8 years or so. We had been lulled into a sense of complacency, and many younger builders who have not lived through and seen multiple cycles of the market are unaware and unprepared. No one ever said that those budgetary lows would last forever. Although 2018 saw a notable peak, current prices for many consumer DDR5 and DDR5 kits, I think I said DDR4 and DDR5, have already doubled or tripled in just the last few months of 2025, with industry experts warning that these costs may reach record heights by mid-2026. Are you right to worry about how long this will last? Absolutely. Are you right to perceive that this is unprecedented? Absolutely not. Contrary to the pricing bathtub the market has seen since 2022, the market is currently in a memory crisis or supercycle. The 2025 explosion after a period of relative value in early 2025, prices began to skyrocket in the second half of the year. For example, 32GB DDR5 6000 kits that cost approximately $120 in May 2025 rose to nearly $140 by December 2025. These kits can be found for $350 to $360 now, and that is not outside the thumb rules of pricing that characterize the post-disaster era, and we'll talk a little bit more on that later. So an important thing to hold in context here, as I go through talking about the history of RAM prices, for me as a PC builder, and I've been building since 1999, so almost 30 years, kind of in the mid-frame of that, or after we came out of that disaster area, my own personal thumb rule that I use for RAM is that I expected to pay $10 per gigabyte. So if I was getting a 16 gigabyte kit, I was expecting to pay $160. Now, my barometer of how bad the market is whether or not we're upside or downside of that. If we're over that, if you're paying more than $10 per stick, then the market is not good, but it's also not way out of whack. So if you're at 160 and you get prices that float up above that, then okay, that's kind of one of those times that maybe you wait and you hold off and you wait till things cool off. If you're below that, which is where we have been in a period where you were able to buy 32 gigabyte RAM kits for $82. That is ridiculous, and that is not the historical norm. And I think that's the thing that I need people to understand. And I'm talking about the historical norm over the last 20 to 30 years of the RAM history. We have been at an all-time low for RAM prices, and so people are flipping out about where RAM prices are. Where these prices are and where things are really, really, really bad are also in like very narrow segments of the market, and that's another thing we're going to talk about. It's not the entirety of the DIY RAM market. Current sticker shock. As of January 2026, prices for some high-end kits have increased by 100% to 169% in a matter of months. Entry-level 32GB DDR5 kits are frequently retailing for over $300. Again, not outside historical pricing cycles. So again, during like over this 30-year period, where I have settled when I'm building, when I'm budgeting, is that if I'm getting RAM, if I'm getting a 32GB RAM kit for less than $320, then the market is good. But again, when I say that, my perspective is the market is good, and I don't expect the market to always be good. I don't expect it to always be a buyer's market. Legacy DDR4 impact. Production of DDR4 is being scaled back, leading to scarcity-driven price hikes, even for older platforms. Some 16GB DDR4 3200 kits have jumped from $50 in mid-2025 to $120 by early 2026. And a lot of this is us further driving the cycle, exacerbating the impact by panic buying. And as we go through this, we're also going to talk about differentiating the demographics of the piece, what we have historically called the PC enthusiast market, but now I'm determined to start addressing that as two different things because it's not homogenous. I think we've talked about it as like all PC enthusiasts are the same, and they are not. There is a huge majority of people who just do not spend money, and they are not the people who make the market go, and they are not the people who the market is focused on. The people who spend money, which is a very skinny percentage, are the people who are really impacted, and that's the people you want to look at in terms of price sensitivity, because the people who are not spending money are price sensitive to a $1 raise, a $5 raise. The moment prices are out of whack and not super budget and super friendly, they're not spending money because their norm is not to spend money. So that is not the market reaction that I think is most impactful. The market reaction that is most impactful is whether or not the price sensitivity, the price elasticity starts hitting the people who actually spend money and actually put currency right into the market, into the barter trade system between supplier and buyer. The current pricing is driven by structural shifts rather than simple inflation. AI data center demand. Manufacturers are prioritizing production of high memory bandwidth and server DRAM for AI, which has severely restricted the supply of standard consumer DDR5. Supply crunch. Major manufacturers like Samsung have reportedly doubled contract prices recently due to no stock situations. Manufacturer strategy. Some vendors have stopped selling standalone RAM to ward off scalpers or are offering pre-built systems without modules to manage costs. And I want to say maybe it was Digital Extreme that I see now that offers like a no RAM, buy kit, which is really just another way of saying like it's a bare bones kit that's not including the RAM. Their deal is a little different. It's like they won't put the RAM in, so you can buy the RAM, but then you send the RAM to them and have them integrate it, which I don't know that I would do all that. So, anticipated peak. Most analysts expect prices to continue to rising at a rate of 30% to 50% per quarter through the first half of 2026. But AI data centers are not looking for 8GB, 16GB 6, or even 32GB 6. Price watch those. So again, in a lot of these areas, I am kind of the same mindset as Moore's Law is dead, not as rose-colored glasses or happy path or like everything's okay as he is, but I am definitely on the side of there's a lot of hyperbole going on, and there's a lot of, the world is ending doomsayers, people with the flipboard standing on the corner, right, saying that the rapture is about to happen, that I think is way overly. And this is one of his perspectives also, is that the kits that that data centers are going after, or the supply side impact of the market, is for the high volume kits like the 64GB kits, and that's why to me there's pricing for 16GB and 32GB kits that I don't necessarily believe are hitting prices that would entirely shake off a PC power enthusiast right from doing an upgrade. Stabilization timelines. Relief is not expected until at least late 2026 or 2027 as new fabrication facilities like Samsung's P4 and SK Hynix's M15X take time to reach mass production and wholesale challenge. And one of the things I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go through today how the DIY RAM market is really made up. I wrote an article about that. We talked about that last episode, about who the big suppliers are and how that might shift and change. So please feel free to go back and listen to that episode or read the article that I wrote over on 10 Keyless. So good background info, but this return to an exceeding of the 2018 peak and higher prices are not unprecedented, especially when we consider consumer RAM prices in the area of Rambus, the Taiwan earthquake and tsunami, and the Japanese nuclear disaster era stretching from 1999 to 2002. It really went a little further than that. It went to about like 2008-ish. All of which impacted industry output and scarcity and drove RAM prices to high levels, along with the California gas crisis of 1999 to 2000 as well. The memory industry has faced similar supply shocks throughout its history. While current 2026 prices for consumer RAM are at a multi-year high, they follow a pattern of supercycles triggered by external disasters or radical technological shifts. And what I mean by supercycle is there are like little fluctuations in the RAM market, but by and large, the RAM market is typified by every 7 to 10 years, right? You get a huge jump, and then 5 years you get a super low, right? And then you get another huge jump, and then a super low. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing the high end of the super cycle, and we're seeing reactions from people that are not built on an understanding of how this business works, and the market works, and how historical pricing has worked. Comparing the current 2025 to 2026 surge to those historical areas provides critical context. Historical high price eras versus 2026. The 1999 Taiwan earthquake. This event remains one of the most drastic short-term spikes in memory history. Following the 7.6 magnitude quake in September 1999, spot prices for 64-bit DRAM modules jumped 5 times their July levels within months. A 128 megabyte module that cost $150 at the start of the month doubled to $300. The Rambus RDRAM era, and I said megabyte, that may have been gigabyte, I'm not sure. I don't remember my history right off the top of my head that well. The Rambus RDRAM era 1999 to 2002, Intel's exclusive support for high bandwidth RDRAM created a period of extreme sticker shock. Because RDRAM was significantly more expensive to manufacture than standard SDRAM, consumers in the early 2000s often paid 3 to 4 times premium for memory compared to just a year prior. So if you don't remember RDRAM, Rambus was this effort by Intel. I think this was Pentium 4. I'm not absolutely certain. I think it was Pentium 4. And they originally tried to push Pentium 4. It was kind of like what AMD did with AM5 and DDR5, saying, hey, to go to this right next tech refresh, you need to move RAM. Rambus was this alternative technology to DDR. And like I said, I think it was Pentium 4. And Intel tried to say, in order to go to Pentium 4, you have to go to Rambus. It was extremely prohibitive. I want to say that it was like to get 2 16 gigabyte sticks, maybe 2 8 gigabyte sticks, it was like $800. It was ridiculous. It was highly performant, way more performant than DDR. But the question people had was, do I need that much performance, really? And again, the push was originally for it was mandatory. And then when Intel saw that people weren't going to buy it, then Intel said, okay, we're now going to make it compatible with DDR, is the way I remember it. The 2011 triple disaster. The earthquake, tsunami, and Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan disrupted the global supply of silicon wafers and NAND flash. This led to a period of volatility that lasted through 2012, as manufacturers like Samsung and Hynix temporarily stopped providing spot market price quotes due to extreme scarcity. So, if I remember correctly, this was yet another tsunami earthquake thing that also resulted in a nuclear plant meltdown in Japan. And then you had, yet again, 10, 12 years after the last event, a severe crimping of the supply chain for RAM. Okay, so now we're in the 2026 AI supercycle. Current pricing is driven not by a single natural disaster, but by a structural shift where manufacturers are prioritizing high bandwidth memory for AI data centers over consuming DDR5. This has caused DDR5 prices to surge by 171% year over year of late 2025. Is 2026 unprecedented? While the dollar amount per gigabyte is lower than in the early 2000s, the rate of increase in 2025-2026 is what many find unprecedented for the modern era. Price normalization. Historically, RAM prices have fallen by approximately 33 to 36% per year. Again, I'm talking about the era from like 2018 to now. The 2025-2026 cycle has completely reversed this trend, with prices for common 32 gigabyte kits rising from $120 to over $400 in just 7 months. And again, when I look at like 90-day lows on Amazon, there were 32 gigabyte kits before this really started heating up that were going for things like $82. That is a thing what's unprecedented is not the higher prices, but actually the lower prices. And people have built their perceptions of reality around those all-time lows, and now they're having a donkey kick in response to the height of the new prices. The scarcity factor, similar to the 1999 Quake, 2026 has seen panic buying and lean inventory. Some vendors have even stopped selling standalone RAM to prioritize their own pre-built systems. So our overall assessment is this isn't new and is not driven by disasters and acts of God. It is recoverable, and there is an equilibrium that the market will find that it is currently seeking. People want to sell RAM to consumers. Maybe not the people who you've always been used to. Obviously, Micron no longer wants to sell RAM directly to consumers with its Crucial brand. But there is money to be made in exchange for goods, and the market will find a way. So expanding on that commentary a bit. So like I said, I am mainly on the same kind of outlook as Moore's Law is dead, broken silicon. This is likely not the apocalypse that a lot of people are pretending. So right now, and I checked prices again before recording the segment, a Crucial Pro DDR5 RAM kit, 32 gigabyte kit. Again, Crucial, the brand that Micron just said they're discontinuing, right? With heat spreaders, and that's another important thing because over this 26 year era, we've also seen a period where heat spreaders were not norm. They were not, like mainstream DIY kits did not come with heat spreaders on them. That is a thing that became normalized kind of in the post-2015 time period, I would say. And so you may start seeing pricing differentiation between whether or not those are included or not included, because that's the way it used to be before. So right now, a Crucial Pro DDR5 32 gigabyte kit with heat spreaders is $350. Again, from somebody who's been building for close to 30 years, my norm was $10 per gig, and then assess whether or not the market is up or the market is down based on that. $350 is not way out of whack from a 322 gigabyte, thumb rule. So the things people are saying in the example cases that they are pointing to are not true, right? They're pointing to the worst case scenarios, the $700 64 gigabyte RAM kits, and they're doing the typical PC part picker warrior shtick, right? The whole thing started when the PS5 Pro came out. These are people who are not PC builders, but more importantly, they are not power enthusiast PC builders, so they don't spend money. So even if they claim they're a PC gamer, they're a PC gamer who buys at the bare minimum, at the least they can buy. They buy off Craigslist, they buy off Facebook Marketplace, right? They're pointing to the worst case scenarios. And like I said, all these PC part picker warriors who don't actually build PCs, but will run off the PC part picker asserting that, this is what the market is. No gamer needs 64 gigabytes of RAM. So, talking about the people who are pointing to the 64 gigabyte RAM scenario. I run systems with 64 gigabytes. I do it mainly for talking points and for clout, and so I can say I have a blown out rig. So I'm kind of joking. This is probably not as superficial as even I paint it. The reality is, look, I've been building for close to 30 years, and so I feel like after all of the rigs that I've built, and my typical shtick has been to do 1 or 2 builds a year. So over 25, 26 years, I've built 50 plus rigs. And the machine I'm on right now has 64 gigabytes. So why do I have 64 gigabytes? Because I've been building for 20 plus years, and I'm like, okay, well, now I feel like I deserve a 64 gigabyte rig. But I also, because I video edit almost daily, and so I never want to have to worry about any performance scenario in gaming or content creation. And that's just my shtick now, my approach to PC building. I build so that I never have to worry, so that I never have to ask questions. Can you do this? I don't care. I don't even bother asking because I know that I'm way above board, from what I need at the minimum. But most gamers are fine on 32 gigabytes. So right now, a G-Skill Flare X5 Series DDR5 RAM kit, 16 gigabytes is $250. Again, my thumb rule, $10 per gigabyte, $160. If you're paying $250, that's a thing you got to consider. But to me, if you had to do an entirely from the ground up build right now, I don't think that paying that extra $90 is necessarily prohibitive. It would say, well, I'm not going to build. Yeah, maybe you wait a few months, but again, if you had to build for some reason right now, I don't think it's completely ridiculous. And that's if you're building from the ground up. And so if you're building from the ground up, you could absolutely slum it for a few months, buy a main board with 4 DIMM slots, buy the 250 gigabytes of RAM, right? And then you can buy 2 more 16 gigabyte sticks later. And then you figure out, well, where am I going to save that $90? On the power supply, on the main board. Maybe that's a reason why, build on Ryzen. Maybe I build on a high-end GPU. Or APU, I'm sorry. That's not my preference, but maybe that's what you do. Maybe I build that on a lower-end Ryzen CPU SKU, like a 9600 or a 9700 or whatever, instead of going for, an X3D type chip. So the truth is, as I've been talking about, is in the enthusiast market, almost none of us are building ground-up rigs requiring all the parts. We salvage, we forklift. If you've been building for 5 years or more, for me, I never build from a ground-up rig. When I buy a case, it's just because I want a cosmetically new case, right? I don't need to buy a case. If I buy a power supply, there was a period, where GPU power requirements moved, and I had to upgrade, my PSU to get PSUs that were compliant with the new GPUs. Right? But now I'm baselined with, multiple 1,000 watt PSUs. I don't need to buy a PSU. Normally, I do a foundational build where I buy like the main board, a processor, and a new AIO. And again, the AIO is really because cosmetically I want to buy like a new AIO. So a foundational build is not all 8 parts as people are behaving. It's probably 2, right? Maybe 3. And then you salvage and you put things together. I move SSDs over, every once in a while I buy like 1 additional SSD because I already have like 4 right in a case. So most people, the real scenario is they're not building an entirely new rig. They're building a select number of parts. I will typically do that as a foundational build, and then I'll wait a year, and then I'll upgrade the GPU. So again, not an apocalypse. Let's talk about the demographics of the PC DIY market. There are 2 enthusiast markets. There are tinkerers, and then there are power enthusiasts. The reality is those Steam metrics that you see mean something. And admittedly, I've chosen to not buy into those Steam metrics for a very, very, very long time. I've always felt like they're skewed, that they represent way too much volume from the esports and cyber cafe dynamic. But when I listened to the commentary from Valve around the Steam Machine and the number of I think they said like 60%, 70%, the Steam Machine exceeds the performance specs of 60 or 70% of their user base. I'm starting to take that a little bit more at face value. And then when I talk about some of my recent experiences with PC gamers that I talked to in the fall last year, it is readily apparent to me that, I've been fooling myself that I felt the type of builder and power enthusiast that I am, typified more of the market. Wasn't the majority, but was a much bigger percentage than I thought that it was, but it's not. So I'm starting to change that perspective. In fact, I have changed it, right? There are a lot of people I think squawking right now who are not in the power enthusiast market. And who are not seriously planning on doing any type of upgrade in 2026. That power enthusiast market is like maybe 14% of the total PC gaming market, maybe 28 to 30% max. And those people like me are in no immediate need to upgrade. And if they are price averse to the current RAM market, and I just walked through all the several instances that show that there is a reason that not everyone will be price sensitive to the current market pricing and pricing elasticity that we are seeing. Again, I don't think we land in some DIY extinction level event akin to the North American video market crash of 1983. I don't think we're going to see no one buying parts in 2026. I think that's preposterous. So I'm not saying that the prices won't go up, and I'm not saying that some other component prices won't rise, but I think what we're going to see is some churn and some time-bound super cycle that will not last forever, and we'll see the industry and the market figure it out and seek equilibrium, like I said in my article. Remember that the PC market is up just over 10% this year, while the console market is up a bit over 4%. No one on the supplier side wants to stop selling gaming PCs or servicing that market. So I don't think that this will last forever, and I don't think that we'll feed some cycle that makes for greater than expected traction for the Xbox Magnus. The Xbox Magnus, at best, is here 2 years from now. Banking on, believing, fomenting, like, fear or hyper concern that the pricing situation that we're seeing now, which again, as I've articulated over the last 20 minutes, is not as exacerbated as people are making it out to be, is isolated at the high end of the high volume RAM market. There are kits that are still within an affordability envelope at the lower end. But predicting, so one, claiming that the market is more exacerbated than it actually is, and then on top of that, claiming that it's going to last for 2 years, is again, to me, just preposterous, and is very clickbaity, and is very, outrage driven and seeking to play on the algorithm and yada, yada, yada. So claiming that that is going to happen to the point where that creates a greater market opportunity for Xbox Magnus than it would have otherwise had, just based on the wildly lopsided console market. Again, the tinkerers on potato PCs who don't want to spend money are also not going to be encouraged to buy an $800 plus console to play modern games, because those people are not playing modern games in new releases. They're playing 7 Days to Die, World War Z, Dead by Daylight. They're playing games, they're playing indies, they're playing games that are not performance bound. They're not playing, Capcom games that are struggling to get over 60 frames per second. They're playing on 1080p displays at 60 frames per second, and even then sometimes compromising on their graphical settings in order to get to 60 frames per second. On some games, they're not compromising. They're playing maxed out. They're playing all the games that they want to, but they're not. We've heard Piscatella talk about how the market is in terms of who's actually buying games. Those are incredibly small percentages. The people on potato PCs and the vast majority of the market is reflected in that Steam hardware survey, and those people are not performance bound. They're not worried about upgrades, but by the same token, they're not going to be encouraged to buy a micro PC, a faux PC that acts and behaves and markets itself as a PC, but is still more expensive than the $300 entry-level GPUs that they're buying on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, or waiting for deep sales. These 7000 series, 2 or 3 generation behind Radeon GPUs, right? These XX60 SKU GPUs. Those people are not going to be encouraged to buy an $800 plus console, because they're spending $200 or $300 for GPUs, and they put them in there and they play them until they break or don't work anymore. And power enthusiasts like me scoff at the notion of spending for subpar performance in comparison to our 64 gigabyte rigs and our XX80 SKU cards or higher. So there's tons of other stuff that I could go into, but the segment has already gone 30 minutes or is getting there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up and move on to segment 2. Hey, what's up, everybody? So one thing I'm doing is I'm adding this appendment on to the conversation about RAM prices, because this thought occurred to me and then I forgot to record it in the original segment. One thing that I think we should consider is that think about the PC DIY market, addressable market in its entirety. And let's just pick a baseline number, and we're going to call it 5 years. We're going to say that population probably upgrades every 5 years. And that's taking some law of averages, and there are certainly people who upgrade more frequently. There are definitely people who do like this trading up of GPUs, like they take the current GPU on, they sell it, they capture some resale value from that, and then they upgrade their GPU, and they do that and they upgrade more frequently, like maybe every 2 to 3 years, and there's all sorts of flavors in between, but let's just call it 5 years. So we've got a 5-year window in which the average singular individual is going to upgrade. Then we have the entirety of the PC gaming population. And so what I want you to think about is that there's this sliding window, right, where any one of those individuals as a data point is going to choose to do an upgrade. They're all on different timelines. And so what that means is that for 2026, and let's just say for some of what I think are kind of the crazy projections, that this chilling effect of rising prices in the DIY market is going to remain in effect for 2 years, which I don't think is really like what's going to happen. That means that in that sliding window, 2/5 of that population that would upgrade within that 5-year time period would be impacted, right, by rising RAM prices in 2026 and 2027. Out of those I talked about in the original segment, right, not all of those people actually spend money. And not all of those people, like those, those people will have bought RAM and will sit on that RAM until they are forced to move to a new thing, until they have to do a processor upgrade, and that forces them to move to DDR5 because that processor is just not compatible with DDR4. So take that 2/5 of the population, that 40%, right? And you can, again, I'm going to just use some, hand wavy, swaggy numbers and say chop that in half, right, to 20%. Because even out of that total population, you have people who aren't going to upgrade in that timeline. They're just going to sit on something till it's broke. So now you're down to 20%. Out of that 20%, right, you have people who are going to upgrade but don't necessarily need to upgrade RAM, like don't need to necessarily upgrade that component. I run multiple rigs in the lab. I run 5 rigs in the lab. 2 out of those 5 rigs are already on DDR5. Then you're going to have some people who are going to upgrade because, like I talked about in the original segment, while prices are higher, they are not necessarily price sensitive, right, within the band of pricing elasticity that we currently see, right? There are people who see, a kit for $280, $250, whatever, as being acceptable. And so those people are still going to upgrade. So my point of this is that you have a really, really, really skinny, small percentage of people who will actually be potentially impacted by the RAM prices. And even when I say that only if those prices remain in place for a 2-year time period, which is not what I think is going to happen. If it lasts shorter than that, then you have an even smaller percentage of the market, right, that's actually impacted during that time frame. And I think when we talk about the percentage of the market that will potentially be impacted and the percentage of the market that actually spends money, those will be people that will choose to either, pay the higher prices or will just decide to wait. I think the other thing that we're going to see, depending on what the market does, like I'm not saying that the market is going to get back to a point where you can buy a 32 gigabyte RAM kit for $82. I quite honestly think those times are over. I think that the market, as Brap asked me last night, I think the market will cool and we will get back to a bathtub, but that bathtub may not be at the lowest low that we saw during this time period. But I think along with that, I think people's perception and threshold, there's this thing in sociology called a significant, I forget what it's called, a significant threshold move where your perception of reality moves, right, as things evolve. And I think what we will see is we will see people who become normalized, right, to what new RAM prices are. I'm not saying that they'll become normalized if RAM prices stay at like 150% over what they were, but I think RAM prices will get back definitely closer to that $10 per gigabyte kind of thumb rule. And they may, eventually drop lower than that. And they will certainly do that over the 30-year time period of super cycles that I talked through in segment 1. And I think along the way, the market will normalize. The market will, make its threshold shift in perception. And then once people do that, because what PC gamers will do as prices rise, kind of like we're seeing with GPUs, right? Prices will go up. That doesn't mean there's a permanent suppression of demand. What happens is people's perception of what they think of as the price that the market is going to charge becomes normalized, and they just say, look, I would like prices to go lower, but I'm not going to sit around and wait forever. I'm just going to suck it up and understand that is the new market price, and decide that I'm going to stay in PC gaming and pay it or move on. And so I think people will become more accustomed to what those prices are. I think people will, again, kind of like I described, become people who have been around PC gaming for 30 years and will understand that like the market goes through this and will make their choices. But the main thing I wanted to get in here was that notion of the sliding window pane, right? That captures the subset of the market that is impacted. The entirety of the market is not impacted. The only people who are impacted are the people who are literally, realistically, truly in an upgrade window during this time of rising RAM prices. And at an outside chance that lasts for 2 years, then you've got 2/5 of the market which will potentially be impacted. And then I've talked through all the reasons why that subset is actually a much smaller percentage than even that. So that's the only thing I wanted to add here. I will let you guys get back to the next segment of news. Okay, let's move on to segment 2 and start talking about Xbox. So this news story over on Xbox Wire, Developer Direct returns January 22nd, Watch Fable, Forza Horizon 6, and Beast of Reincarnation gameplay direct from the studios. 2026 is going to be an incredible year for Xbox players. You might even call it a fabled year. To celebrate, we're kicking off with the 4th installment of our Developer Direct broadcast on January 22nd, bringing you news, new gameplay, and insights directly from the incredible teams working on titles coming this year. Presented by the game creators themselves, Developer Direct will once again give you an inside look at not just the games, but the studios working to bring them to life. Fittingly for Xbox's 25th anniversary year, that includes the return of some of our most legendary franchises, which rub shoulders with a brand new title from one of Japan's most beloved studios. So, during this direct, we're expecting to see Fable, Forza Horizon 6, Beast of Reincarnation. You can tune in at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern to see all the latest on those 3 games. And then they mentioned stay tuned to our official social channels for more from Developer Direct, airing on Thursday, January 22nd. Then another thing that I wanted to mention is this story over on Game Informer. Avowed, Xbox's first-person fantasy RPG, is coming to PlayStation 5 next month. Avowed, Xbox's first-person fantasy RPG, developed by Obsidian Entertainment and released on Xbox and PC last year, is coming to PlayStation 5. More specifically, Avowed launches on PS5 on January 17th, a day shy of the game's first anniversary. The standard edition will cost $49.99, and the premium edition, which includes a digital art book and soundtrack, as well as 2 player armors and 8 companion skins, will cost $59.99. The same day Avowed hits PS5, the game will get a new anniversary update on all platforms that adds New Game Plus, new races to play, Dwarves, Orlin, and Amawa, a new weapon type, photo mode, and more. So there's new content. I thought I saw something about like some performance improvements. I don't see that in this article, but hopefully those will come as well. You know, some additional graphical polish, etc. So we'll hold up there before we get on to some of the other topics. So Avowed was, I like Avowed. Interesting that it's obviously coming to PlayStation 5 after kind of a long period where, to me, the dialogue of, games need to be on every platform, was it synonymous with some of the Xbox games that weren't on every platform? I struggle a little bit to, if you're going to be very loud about that assertion, and then don't actually execute it upon it yourself. We have this whole kind of back and forth about, when we first mentioned, had Xbox mentioned this multi-platform strategy, there was this notion of, there was this set of governance rules that determined like when a game would go or what game would go, and it wouldn't necessarily be the whole slate, but it turned out it is the whole slate. It's always just a matter of time. And so I don't know if like where Avowed was, and maybe because of some of the problems that it encountered in its development cycle, it didn't kind of get consumed into this kind of normative production pipeline and workflow that says all games are going right to multiple platforms. So I'm glad to see that it's finally getting over. Avowed is a game that I like. Obsidian is one of my top favorite studios of all time. So I'm happy to see that game make it over to PlayStation. And it's absolutely possible that I'll pick up another copy there and play it on PlayStation 5. We will see. The showcase itself, I'm personally probably not watching it, and that's not solely because it's Xbox. There's a little bit of Xbox dynamic in there, but it's also just because this year I'm pivoting more and more so to really focusing on playing like the games that I love, which, I know lots of people don't agree with it, but are more of kind of like your games as a service games, but also kind of like your forever games that I can put dozens, hundreds, thousands of hours into and keep playing it. A couple of weekends ago, actually at this PC, I was, spent 5 hours playing Elite Dangerous, which I'm planning on spending a lot more time in. Obviously, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty, Black Ops 7. Have been playing some on PC. Have been playing some EA Football Club 26 on Xbox, and then No Man's Sky on PlayStation 5. And that's kind of where like I really want my gameplay to personally center. I'm not going to be as thirsty about the new releases as much this year, although I will keep my eye out and play ones that pique my interest. But so I'm probably transitioning into this time where I'm not going to be, watching all of the showcases at the moment in time. I will probably just, find a roll up or go to their YouTube channel and watch like the specific videos. Like I'm not personally like super interested in Fable. It was never like my type of game. And again, I'm just not somebody who tends to, buy an RPG where I'm going to spend like 40 hours plus. in the game. So I'm not particularly interested in Fable, nor this beast of whatever game. um, Forza Horizon 6, I'm interested in, but I love Forza Horizon. But my true passion was the Motorsport series, and that's on a major hiatus. And some people, even Xbox fans, are saying that franchise is over. Despite the comments from Phil Spencer, because the comments from Phil Spencer are indeterminate, right? It's, oh, we're going to get back to it, but, no idea when. So it could skip a generation. Who knows? And obviously, Turn 10 has been significantly impacted by layoffs. More on that here in a little bit. So I'm, going to be happy to play Forza Horizon 6 if it turns out okay. I'm just in a mode where I don't presume that any game really is going to be good. It's all about like how the game lands and how it's delivered, not about trailers and the hype cycle preceding it. And on Forza Horizon 6, I don't feel like I need to watch the play in the lead up. Like I don't need to see every developer directory and like every like reveal of like this gameplay or this event type. Like Forza Horizon is Forza Horizon. We're going to a new location. That's going to be cool. I actually quite honestly hope that in Japan features that we get a lot of like the mountainous area and like the snowy areas, and obviously we should still have that seasonality, so I hope that plays as it always has. I hope that it's not just like street racing in Tokyo, right? Like there's a lot more to the geographic variety of Japan, and I hope that we're going to get to that. But again, like I said, I don't need to watch the play-by-play. This is one that I'll be fine to watch the trailer on YouTube the next day. I do like the format of the Developer Direct. I've always said that. I love hearing from the developers, and I've always liked the Developer Direct, which is kind of a very Ubisoft-like format. Show the trailer for the game, have the creative director come out and communicate what the game's vision is, what they're trying to accomplish, and then hear from like another dev or devs. I like that kind of stuff personally. I like hearing from the developers. I like hearing more about. I don't like just seeing a trailer. I like hearing about like what it is, behind your creative vision. What were some of the critical design choices you made? What's some of the technology like behind it? What's going on in the dev cycle? And so hopefully we'll continue to see those things in the Dev Direct. That to me plays a lot better than just showing a trailer or just showing a trailer and having Phil Spencer or Sean Layden or somebody, end cap it with, some commentary on how much they're looking forward to the game. So unfortunately, at this point, we need to talk about the other stuff that may potentially happen from Microsoft and Xbox in the month of January. And so one of the things I do want to bring up is this additional article over on VGC. 2025 was the worst year on record for Xbox consoles in the UK. That's according to sales data shared by the game business journalist Christopher Dring, who claimed on social media that Xbox console sales were down nearly 40% last year compared to 2024. 2025 was a challenging year for all console platforms, with PlayStation 5 sales also down 19% in the UK, and we'll talk, I think in this episode, we'll talk a little bit more about Nintendo Switch 2 holiday sales as well. But the sharper decline in Xbox hardware comes as Microsoft increasingly switches its focus away from its own hardware and traditional console sales. So one of the things that I think, we have to admit the truth to, right, in terms of acknowledging historical precedents. For the past couple of years, it has not been unusual. In fact, the objective pattern of behavior that has been shown is Xbox does a developer direct or their summer showcase, and then within 1 to 4 weeks does a massive layoff, right, like close on the heels of that developer direct. And then they report earnings. Microsoft earnings are predicted this year to come out sometime between 28 January, I think, and 4 February. And unfortunately, I readily expect this pattern of behavior to continue this year. I expect it to happen due to the adversity they're seeing in gaining AI traction and the low Copilot numbers. I expect to see it because of Satya's deepening time spent exclusively on AI, the reorg that they did last year, so that he could spend his time on AI. I expect this to happen because of the past pattern of behavior and the historical precedents that's been set. Those things are not opinion. Those are things that have happened. And I expect it to happen because of the comments made last year about the type of content they need to make and who their competition really is, right? The whole, our competition is TikTok kind of thing. So I don't say these things with joy, but I say these things because they are what I expect, and let's hope I'm wrong and that things turn out to be different. if those things happen, they're going to be a very short turnaround from the showcase. Just revisiting some of the other things that I've talked about, I do expect, right, because of the pattern of behavior, because of the type of content, because of the competition, I have said that I expect studio closures to happen, potentially this year as well. I expect people who are tightly coupled to long enduring franchises that have the type of engagement and provide the the competitive impact on the attention based economy that we're seeing in the competitive market now. I expect those people to be, I won't use the term safe, but I expect those people to be okay. People working on, ESO, people working on these long term franchises that, the folks at Blizzard who are on Overwatch and Diablo, I expect them, to weather these things okay. But like when you're doing single player content and it's not like needle moving content, I expect Tim Schafer's studio to be okay, because I think even Xbox has this concern about crossing certain lines that have a certain amount of, I'll call it political capital, right, in the gaming industry. I don't think you touch Tim Schafer's studio. I don't think you mess with Obsidian. But, Ninja Theory and Compulsion Games, who obviously they need to get Clockwork Revolution out, but like I don't have high hopes, for what happens to them after they get that game out. And some of their other studios, working on the smaller stuff. So I think I may be getting the studios mixed up, but we'll see what happens with. I guess Compulsion did South of Midnight, so I'm getting them mixed up here in the moment. So, but the studio that worked on. The studio that's working on Clockwork Revolution obviously needs to get that out. I don't have high hopes for what happens for them after that. The studio that worked on South of Midnight, good that they got awards, but again, I'm very concerned about what happens to that studio. So we'll see how those things go. All right, so let's wrap that up and close out, and let's move on to segment 3. All right, let's go on to talk about the next news story in the rundown. This news story over on Corsair. I guess they have their own blog now. And I don't know who it's by. So it's 007 First Light System Requirements and Recommended Specs. And I screwed up because I stepped away for a moment and took down my script. Give me just 1 second. So I also wanted to make one correction. I don't know why. I guess I was maybe low blood sugar or I was getting hungry or was lightheaded without enough caffeine in the last segment. It is Compulsion Games that did South of Midnight. It's In Exile that is doing Clockwork Revolution. So In Exile is just one of those studios that I don't think about a lot, and so I often don't get it right when I need to recall their name. Anyway, on to the next news story. 007 First Light System Requirements and Recommended Specs. James Bond games have had a checkered past, haven't they? From the legendary nostalgia bait of GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64 to the fairly forgettable entries during the 7th console generation. Now, though, IO Interactive have been given a go and are delivering the first James Bond game in about 15 years. However, this means nothing if your system can't handle it. So it's time for the specs, PC specs. And I'm only going to go over the recommended system specs. I'm not going to really worry about the minimum system requirements. And so recommended system specs are Windows 10 or 11, CPUs an Intel Core i5 13500K or AMD Ryzen 5 7600. So I think the 135 was Raptor Lake, I think, or maybe Meteor Lake, but whatever proceeded after Alder Lake. 32 gigabytes of RAM, GPU RTX 3060 Ti or AMD RX 6700 XT, and a storage of 80 gigabytes. This write-up doesn't flesh out everything that's mentioned in the actual specs that came from IO Interactive. So to add to that, recommended PC hardware requirements, this is for 1080p at 60 frames per second. We already talked about the CPU and the GPU and the RAM requirements. But the interesting thing here is that the video RAM requirement is 12 gigabytes. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. Happily, IO Interactive has also given us performance aims for each set of specs, though they are a bit less detailed than we'd like. The minimum spec should get you 30 frames per second at 1080p, and the recommended specs will produce 60 frames per second at 1080p. Of course, many PC gamers are running 1440p or higher monitors. The ones that are spending money are, but again, that's a ridiculously small percentage of the market. The vast majority of people are running 1080p. They are often running dual 1080p monitors, but they're running 1080p monitors. Are running 1440p or higher monitors these days, so hopefully we'll get more detailed performance estimates before the May 27th release date. I would estimate that you're not going to get more detailed performance estimates. Your best reliance is probably going to be that they drop some trailer or gameplay footage and that Digital Foundry or somebody parses that and kind of decomposes it and pulls it apart. Can I run 007 First Light? It's not a super intensive game, but it's not lightweight either, and given that the developers claim that the recommended specs will get you 60 frames per second at 1080p, which is what we consider to be the bare minimum, this game might end up being harder to run than the specs would have you believe. Normally our first, and so they kind of go into like, what are some things that you can upgrade if you're worried about whether or not you can run it. They talk about how they get that, RAM may not be the thing that you're going after. We covered that ad nauseum in segment 1. And they talked about, if trying to bump your RAM now isn't something that's desirable, maybe you want to go for a GPU. I looked at GPU prices a little bit before. It looks like what happened in the market was the all-time low for the market in recent history was really kind of mid-November through mid-December. And if you missed the boat then, you're in an era now where those GPU prices are starting to rise again. I don't think they're any worse than they had been during the release of the post-release of the 5000 series RTX cards. I paid a price premium over MSRP for my RTX 5080. Prices now are probably about the same. Scarcity is a little more difficult, and so there are prices for less than what I paid for my RTX 50, but those things are ridiculously long, delivery dates, or they're just not available. They list a price, but they're out of stock. So, but I mean, you should be able to find at least a market that is at least where it was when I bought my RTX 5080, but that is going to put you at over MSRP. It looks like if you're shopping for 5070, you will probably be able to find a card at or near MSRP and be fairly well off. 5070 Ti looks like it's coming in slightly above MSRP, but not hugely so, I don't think. So, again, there are options for upgrades potentially, and for the market of people, the demographic of people that spend money, I think they have options. Some of the other additional things that I wanted to pull apart when we talk about these specs. So the 007 specs are a bit of a strange tale, and the first thing to pick up on is the disconnect between the recommended specs, where they call out a minimum RTX 3060 Ti, but also a minimum 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That's weird because there was no 12 gigabyte SKU of the RTX 3060 Ti. The RTX 3060 launched with a 12 gigabyte SKU, then had an 8 gigabyte SKU follow-on, and then a 12 gigabyte refresh. What that translates to me is that I would look at these things as an and statement, right? You need a minimum RTX 3060 Ti and a card that has at least 12 gigabytes for the recommended specs. And what that means is that since an RTX 3060 Ti doesn't have 12 gigabytes, the 12 gigabytes is really the constraining factor. And so since the first SKU in the RTX 3000 series lineup, as you go from low end to high, is an RTX 3080 12 gigabyte or a 3080 Ti, that's where I think you really need to be if you really want to play at 1440p, especially without significant compromise. For the 3080 12 gigabytes, that is the January 2022 refresh, since the launch RTX 3080 SKU that came out in September 2020 was only 10 gigabytes. Of course, that coming out at the height of, both crypto problems and the, pandemic. So I don't know that anybody bought that card. I didn't get a hold of an RTX 3000 series card until I was able to get my hands on a 3080 Ti a couple years later. So I have a strong suspicion also, since there has been an announced partnership between NVIDIA and IO Interactive for this game, which has been announced. They announced that, special collaboration and engineering support and blah, 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 blah going on between the two of them. But my guess is that what that indicates is that ray tracing is going to be mandatory, just as was the case with Doom the Dark Ages last year. Now, I had friends last year on lower spec 3000 series cards. I have as I mentioned, I have an RTX 3080 Ti in my lowest tier rig right now. And those friends of mine did not have a performant experience on Doom the Dark Ages due to the mandated ray tracing. And some of them actually, it was, bad enough for them that they just bounced off the game entirely. Again, that's not saying that the game ran horribly. That's just, talking about, a group of players for whom 60 frames per second is minimum, and they weren't able to achieve that with the mandated ray tracing for the friends of mine that were on less than an RTX 3080 Ti. And really, I would say less than an RTX 3080. And that's a shame because, and you see my gameplay in Doom the Dark Ages, some of my gameplay in Doom the Dark Ages here. And it's a shame because I rolled credits on that game over the holidays, and I found it to be a really enjoyable game. Although in retrospect, I will probably eventually revise my statements and agree with the crowd that is saying that Doom Eternal is actually the better game, despite the horrendous level of frustration that I have with Doom Eternal. I think at the end of the day, I was more satisfied overall completing Doom Eternal, though, than I was completing the Doom the Dark Ages. That is an entire tangent and a separate conversation. That whole tangent being said, I strongly suspect that 007 First Light is going to require ray tracing, and it will be non-optional, and we're going to hear a lot of complaints about its performance, except for the people on very strong mid-tier and uber-tier rigs. I personally am still very interested in playing it, as I suspect I won't have performance problems on an RTX 5080 or other configs in between. Again, my lowest tier rig is an RTX 3080 Ti, but I have other rigs above that scale up across two RTX 4070 Supers, an RTX 4080 and an RTX 5080. I assume that somewhere in there I'll hit like the sweet spot of where I want to play. I guess a question, though, is this, and that's whether the game, 007 First Light again, is coming in hot in terms of hardware optimization, in which case there's another discussion to be had about the difficulties you can sometimes encounter with multi-platform releases and trying to tune and optimize for so many different hardware profiles at a singular release. I personally think IO Interactive has done a good job with Hitman World of Assassination, and how that game performs across every platform. But this may be an instance, because they've talked a lot about how they've been working on Glacier and a modified version of the Glacier engine, and really trying to make this 007 First Light be a pretty, spectacular experience, which tells me that they are shooting for something above. They're not just taking Hitman World of Assassination and taking, that graphical work that they had already baselined and making a 007 game. They have tried to make improvements. They've tried to make it more of a spectacle. They've tried to make it more of a graphical feast, and I worry that may be causing them problems, and they've delayed the game, for an additional 2 months of work. But seeing those specs, which it's good that they put them out that early, just causes me a twinge of concern. So this may be an instance where they have just bitten off a little bit more than they can chew at one time, with them trying to stick the landing for multiple platforms at launch. May have been a slightly different story if they had focused on getting the console version out first, or getting the PC version out first and doing a staggered release. But we will have to wait and see. Hey, what's up, everybody? Let's move on to the next news story in the rundown. So this news story over on IGN by Tom Phillips. Nintendo source blames Switch 2 holiday sales slowdown on the economic landscape in the absence of a major Western game, despite the release of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Nintendo Switch 2 sales over the holidays reportedly fell short of those recorded by the console's predecessor back in 2017 during its first end-of-year season. As revealed by the Game Business, Switch 2 sales in the US and within key markets in Europe fell behind the equivalent pace of Switch 1, something that an unnamed senior Nintendo source blamed on a complicated economic climate today, and the absence of a major Western game during the year-end period. That particular analysis will likely raise eyebrows among Nintendo fans as the company launched the long-awaited Metroid Prime 4 Beyond during the period, albeit to a more muted critical response than the franchise's beloved original trilogy. Nintendo has so far made no announcement on how that game has fared. The Game Business reports that U.S. Switch 2 sales over the holiday period were down around 35%, versus the Switch 1's sales performance back in 2017. In the UK, a similar comparison saw Switch 2 lagging Switch 1 by 16%. Even in Nintendo's homeland of Japan, Switch 2 holiday sales couldn't match Switch 1 and were down by 5.5% over the year's final weeks. In France's 2025's final tally of Switch 2 sales, France 2025's final tally of Switch 2 sales was down by over 30% versus the amount Switch 1 notched up back in 2017 meanwhile. So, my comments on this. The Switch, for that device, there was a sense of novelty. We also had PC ports for the first time. I did not start at the top of my script, so let's take that from the top. While there is definitely commentary to be had about the sales as a data point on the Switch 2, I don't think there is anything revolutionary to jump up and down about as a takeaway. My projection during this entire time is that the Switch is going to sell well, the Switch 2 is going to sell well, and occupy significant market share, but its total potential sell-through is likely less than that of the original Switch. The Switch, for that device, there was a sense of novelty. We also had PC ports for the first time, coming to a Nintendo platform as a regular thing, and game types and genres that had not been the historical norm or the type of game you would think about being on a Nintendo platform. And perhaps more significantly now in the second continuity gen for the Switch. And we should consider that Nintendo does not often do that. On the set-top box, there has really only been the NES and Super NES where we saw the continuity of similar form factor, controller, and other capabilities and characteristics that were really harmonious from one generation to the follow-on. With this second iteration, one of the ongoing market dynamics that will occur is you will have people who decide that they do not need to upgrade and can just stay on the last-gen hardware, a factor that will be exacerbated when Nintendo clearly intends to keep supporting the OG Switch with new games that are cross-gen titles. So my point here is that what we have seen on Xbox and what we have seen on PlayStation and what we continue to talk about in large volume is how there are so many people who haven't budged, who haven't moved from the last generation, that there are people playing games that they can continue to play. You're going to see the same thing on Switch, and we should all be kind of arriving at this conclusion without needing a lot of pushing, prodding, right, pulling, and tugging. This should be a natural, common sense conclusion that people should come to, that just as we have seen on the other two consoles where people have chosen and decided that, hey, I'm playing Fortnite, or Call of Duty keeps coming to my old console, or Madden keeps coming to my old console, I therefore don't need to move. Now, I don't know that the percentage, when we talk about, the fact that on Xbox and PlayStation, gamers spend 40% of their time playing the black hole games as a service games, the big titles. I don't think that's necessarily quite the same on the Switch 2, I would imagine, partially because some of those games aren't there. But there are games that are there that occupy a lot of people's time. You still have forever games that are showing up there. You still have the No Man's Sky. You obviously have Fortnite. And there are lots of people who buy a Switch as just a very scaled down Fortnite machine or a mobile Fortnite machine. So I think we're going to see that behavior, that market dynamic occur on the Switch 2 as well. And like I said, when Nintendo is taking the same tact of, making new games that are not, always exclusively Switch 2 games, you're going to also have that continuing knock-on effect. We also had a lot of Switch purchases that went out during the pandemic that were a result of people wanting a handheld that they could curl up on the couch with during a time period where they were on lockdown in quarantine. And so the possibility is that the OG Switch numbers are really inflated beyond what they would have been had we not had a global pandemic. So I don't think we should be flipping out and falling out over about low Switch 2 sales this holiday. I'm sure Nintendo knew that they did not have one of their key mascot titles out this holiday, I would contend. We'll talk about Metroid here in a bit. I'm sure they knew Pokemon Z-A was only going to be a system seller to a certain extent, right? It was not going to capture the market. Yes, Pokemon does huge numbers, but when you talk about the overall addressable market, that's still, only a certain percentage of the market in terms of compelling people that they were going to need to do an upgrade to get to that Pokemon title. And I didn't check. I apologize. Again, this is Pokemon titles are not my area of expertise, so I don't know if I don't recall if Pokemon Z-A was a cross-gen title. My co-host on Enough to Keep Going, Tao, is a real big Pokemon person, and he would definitely know that. We will probably talk about that tomorrow night on the Sunday episode, 11 January, if you want to tune in for that. I will definitely ask him if he is there, or I'll check it here before I record the next segment. But at any rate, I don't think like this is a cataclysmic event to be falling over about. For me personally, what's most disappointing here is that I don't play a ton of the Nintendo mascot games, but I do like the Metroid first-person games. And we are consistently told that the reason we do not get them more frequently is because they don't sell well, in comparison to other big Nintendo mascot titles, right? Of course, we do not have the Metroid sales numbers yet. That was mentioned in the IGN article. I want to say December numbers are supposed to be out like the third week of January, I think is what I saw. I don't track the NPD numbers as closely and tightly as much anymore because I don't spend a lot of time on Blue Sky, which is where Matt Piscatella is. But when those numbers come out, I'm sure I will see them and we can talk about them. But the word on the street is that the Metroid franchise doesn't sell as well as the other big Nintendo titles. So again, of course, we do not have Metroid sales numbers yet, but the indicator here is that the game was not a system seller, and so it is likely going to be another long winter in Westeros before we see another Metroid game of the first-person variety. And yes, all the other stuff is true too. Contractionary fiscal environment, economic uncertainty. Let's remember that all the console sales were down when you isolate to the winter holiday sales, right? So Xbox was down huge. PlayStation was down a little. I want to say the number was 12%. So it should not feel unusual or way out of whack that Nintendo Switch 2 holiday sales were down. Also, it is significant that it's a new console, but like I said, it shouldn't be surprising that it encountered adversity. So let's remember that all console sales were down when you isolate to the winter holiday season, and we should not extrapolate limited, constrained, time-bound data, right, to holistic conclusions. Let's benchmark that the thing is not going to do OG Switch numbers in the first place. Start looking at what that looks like as a trend, and start trying to think about what it means numbers will look like at the 7-year point. As we go through the generation of the Switch 2, let's think about what that means for the follow-on strategy and whether or not Nintendo will do the unprecedented and continue the same form factor, similar packaging, for a third generation in a row. These are interesting times. Let's move on to the final segment and the final story in the news rundown. Hey, what's up, everybody? Let's go on to the next news segment. I think my numbers that I've been calling out for news segments is incorrect. I think this is segment 4. I think I said the last one was segment 5. I don't know. One other thing, and this is why I like doing the pre-recording version of Gaming Outside the Algorithm, because I can catch corrections and correct them before the next episode. So I talked about Pokemon Zeta A in the last segment, and yes, that is a cross-gen title that is available on both Switch and Switch 2. I want to talk about the Steam end-of-year 2025 sales numbers. So this news story over on Polygon by Patricia Hernandez. Steam's best-selling games showed 2025 was a wild, unpredictable ride. And she says, between Arc Raiders, Peak Silksong, and Schedule 1, 2025 was a fascinating year on Steam. As we close out 2025, Valve has released its list of best-performing games on Steam. There are plenty of names on these charts that won't be a surprise to anyone who follows gaming news. The best-selling, highest-earning, and most-played lists have just as many astonishing inclusions, though, all of which prove 2025 was an unusual year for the video game industry. Then again, even the no-brainer game names are wild when you put them into context. For example, extraction shooter Arc Raiders made it into the platinum rank of both top new releases and highest revenue. This doesn't seem shocking at first until you remember that Arc Raiders has only been available for purchase for a couple of months. Indies making a strong showing in the list of highest moneymakers as well, standing tall against behemoths like Battlefield 6 and Borderlands 4. What makes the appearance of games like Hollow Knight, Silksong, and Schedule 1 outstanding is that they raked in money comparable to AAA games despite costing $20 and $10 respectively. Valve doesn't share specific numbers here, either in terms of units or amount of revenue generated, but you've got to imagine the aforementioned games moved a lot of units to get on the platinum tier. Really, it was a good year for games under the typical $70, $69.99 price rating, as evidenced by the platinum tier inclusion of the $39.99 Elden Ring Night Rain as well. And so it goes on to talk about some other things here. I want to kind of talk about, some of my own thoughts on this topic, though. And as I'm sitting here watching gameplay, I am lamenting the loss of the previous Nuketown map. I'm not as much a fan of the aesthetics of the new one, which is the version from Call of Duty Mobile. But at any rate, I digress. So the indie showing here is impressive, but should not be carried too far. We get a lot of, quote unquote, small, we need smaller games, we need more AAA, we need more indies. And I agree from a personal sentiment that I wish those games moved the market more. But let's look at the spread and look at the numbers, and look at, what is on the chart from a AAA perspective. And note that it's the AAA stuff that charts, and what draws huge revenue, in aggregate, in large numbers, right, across the board. While there is more of a chance for indies to break out, and I include in that like indies and kind of like AA kind of stuff, right, from non-traditional publisher channels. While there's more of a chance for indies to break out, while there is that slightly wider sliver of daylight for an indie to find a gap in the D line and break into the backfield, for every one game that makes it, there are thousands of games that don't. And I won't go through all of the Steam numbers. I think I've been through them on one episode before. I've definitely put them on my blog. There's numerous places in which I post that topic. So I won't go through all those Steam numbers again of the percentage of games that draw over 100K. But let's remember that it is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly small when compared to the total of the 19,000 games that are published each year to Steam. It's amazing to me, and so we'll go through these. Let's start going through these charts and kind of talk about some of the breakouts. I think some of my notes are dependent upon the scroll through here. So, again, we kind of see some, big numbers here, or big games here in this platinum tier list, and this list is not ordered. So, what's absolutely possible is that Silksong and Schedule are like the bottom two of these. We also don't know. I can't remember if they publish, what revenue brackets the tiers are. I want to say that I don't know that it definitely doesn't jump out to me as obvious anymore. I thought at one point there was information on that. If there is, I'll have to go back and look for it. I don't remember that they've ever done that. So, but my point is that it's possible that Schedule and Silksong are at the bottom of this list because this platinum tier, these things are not in order. And in fact, I don't think, none of the tiers are they in order. So, they could be bottom two, and the tiers, right? The tier brackets could be like very, very, very wide. But what is? I'm not sure if I can get the whole thing on the screen. I think maybe this is the best I can do in this portal window I have. You have things coming through non-traditional publisher pipelines, like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a great example. But a lot of stuff on here is through traditional publishing pipelines, and at least very, very super high AAA, like right butting up against what you would kind of think of AAA from a low end of the budget perspective. So you've got Football Club up here, you've got Elden Ring, Night Rain. Again, that's not really from an independent studio in my mind. In the same context that we think about it, you've got the Oblivion remake, Monster Hunter Wilds. It's kind of incredible to me that Civ 7 is up here at the platinum tier because it's really not a good game, and it's really not a good installment of the Civilization franchise, and it still needs a lot of work, but here it is. You got Borderlands 4 up here, despite, the Randy Pitchford thing of, telling people that, people would do whatever they have to do to pay for, a thing that they want. I think one of the things that kind of bugs me is it's nice, obviously, to see ARC Raiders up here, but I think in the trend of inaccuracy in gaming journalism that kind of rules the day these days, this also gets way misrepresented. Embark Studios, who does ARC Raiders, is not an indie. They are owned by Nexon. So, again, let's, keep it a buck and keep things accurate and really talk about things and portray things as they really are, and not make, wild extrapolations to suit narratives. And we'll talk about one of those narratives as we go down here. And that's kind of my point, right? When we look at like Civ 7 and like these entrenched franchises, and these things that, again, these things are moving huge numbers. Lots of these games, Monster Hunter Wilds is not a game that plays well on a potato PC. So, you look at some of these things and, yay, verily, maybe there are lots of people out there playing them with like non-performant hardware, but, these are things that are moving numbers from people who need, big metal to run these games well. And we know that that big metal is a really, really, very, very, very small percentage of the overall Steam user base. And so again, what that means is kind of like Piscatella has talked about with regards to console. When we talk about prices, it's not like the entirety of the market that is really relevant in terms of moving large amounts of revenue. It's like it's a small part of the market that really spends money, and I think that's being proven out here as well. The other thing that I want to do, going back to the Civ 7 discussion, is so I draw a data point here like that, like Civ 7, back to the narrative of PlayStation should do day and date and games need to be on every platform. When you go that route, right, and you get out of your box, this is what you're going to be up against. You're going to go to Steam where 19,000 games are coming out, right? And your game is going to be up against games like Civ 7, which is a game that is not a good game, but still performs incredibly well. That is your competitive landscape. That's what you're up against. And so, the understanding that needs to be had is that this is the calculus that developers and publishers have to run to determine if their potential sell-through is worth the gamble. And that includes like when you're making a decision to do things like go to the Xbox platform, right? You're up against, every single game in aggregate that's in Game Pass that people don't have to pay for. In the attention-based economy, you're up against the opportunity cost decision that somebody has to make of, am I going to play a game in Game Pass, or am I going to pay, $40, $50, $60, $70 for a game that's not in Game Pass? That's your competitive landscape. And so we need to keep those things in context and stop making like these binary, absolute value statements of, either the bit is either on or off, right? And that's how people make decisions in business. It is absolutely not. And so again, those are the optics that you're gonna, and those optics on, do I make that gamble? Do I not make that gamble? Are gonna vary wildly when you're talking about somebody who's making that decision as a publisher from that perspective versus a company who's trying to run a platform business who has a dependency on sell-through of hardware. And so I think that's one of the key reasons why, the decisions, get made and the decisions don't get made that people constantly insist, need to be made. So scrolling through the rest of this list, things that I just like to see, doing well from a sales perspective. It's nice to see Doom: The Dark Ages. That's a game that I played this year. Assassin's Creed Shadows coming in at the gold tier. It's kind of good to see from a genre perspective, Europa Universalis and Anno, who are, which are grand strategy games. So nice to see those popping into the top tier. Obviously, nice to see Expedition 33. I don't think I need to go on and on about that. Dispatch coming in as an indie. One of the things that's kind of really amazing to me, and I know Call of Duty, Black Ops 7, that Steam is not like the only sell-through point of that, but the notion that, some of these games did greater numbers than Call of Duty Black Ops 7, I think is a reason why you saw it at like number 7 on the NPD depth chart for, games sold through by the end of November, right? In total of games that had the most sales. So it'll be interesting to see when we get the real end of year numbers here in January, reflecting that final sales month. But at least on Steam, this is reflective of the final sales month, and so I think it's an interesting data point that so many of these games came in either alongside Black Ops 7 or actually ahead of it. When you think about like Silksong and schedule. And again, on PC, I'm sure Black Ops 7 sells a lot through Battle.net. That's where I buy my copy of Black Ops 7. But the dynamic of Call of Duty now being in Game Pass, I think is part of, and it experiencing much stiffer competition. You look at its key competition this year. That key competition is Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders, and both of those games had better sell through on Steam than Black Ops 7. Coming in at the silver tier, some of the things that I like, again, these are just kind of my fandoms. It's nice to see Dynasty Warriors Origins pop into the silver. I think that's a game that doesn't always, that's a franchise that doesn't always have super great sell-through. I did play Origins. Didn't finish it, but, I did buy it and spent, a significant amount of time in it. So it's kind of nice to see it, popping in to the silver tier. Good to see Avowed coming in at silver. Another game that I bought, that I played and playing. Haven't finished it, but it's one of the things that's in the backlog, and so it's that I like. So nice to see it doing well. Spider-Man 2, kind of remarkable that things like Spider-Man 2, Tilu 2, which is a remaster, and Mafia. I'd say the Outer Worlds 2 are coming in at the same tier as NBA 2K26, which is obviously a juggernaut and, obviously sells well, on multiple platforms. Probably sells better on console than it does on PC. We know that, I think in an article that I talked about, not on Gaming Outside the Algorithm, but on Basement Radio Arcade podcast, you look at the types of games from like the Newzoo report that, starkly different games that have huge sell-through on console versus the things that have the highest sell-through on PC. So obviously, 2K26 is not at its highest thriving point on PC, but it's still an interesting data point, right? That Spider-Man 2, Avowed, TLU 2, things like that came in alongside it. Here at the bronze level, again, these are fan picks of mine. Nice to see Assetto Corsa Rally coming in, which is still in early access. Nice to see F125, obviously, for me being a big racing fan. Final Fantasy Tactics, who I've talked a little bit with some other people about, because I think they announced that they sold 1 million units, which doesn't seem like a huge number, but, it's a remake. I don't know that the turn-based tactics genre particularly sells well on console, outside of like Fire Emblem and like Advance Wars, which, Fire Emblem obviously being a Nintendo exclusive, and then, actually Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, being exclusive to the Nintendo console. I don't really know that genre sells huge on console, so the fact that it moved 1 million units and came out at an incredibly busy time of the year, sandwiched in between a lot of these other games that perform better than it on the slate. So I think it's still impressive, that it did well. Stronghold Crusader coming in at bronze. I like. If you're not familiar with the Stronghold franchise, it is, it's an argument of whether like it's a real time strategy game or whatever. It's a castle building game. Is kind of what it's always been to me. I played like the original title when it launched, I think in like 2001 on PC. I haven't kept up as much with all the later titles in the remake, but it's nice that it got like a remake remaster that aggregated like a collection of some of the older titles, and that I got a new release. So, nice to see it coming in well here. Assetto Corsa Evo I'm glad to see it. I love the team at, I think they're Kuno Similus. I'm just going to look it up. I'm just going to look at it while I try and say it. Simulazione. It's, that they're a favorite team of mine. I love the Assetto Corsa franchise. Assetto Corsa Evo is not well received, but apparently people like it enough that it, sold well, which encourages me to actually go over and check it out despite the Steam user community reviews. Escape from Tarkov, which didn't come out until November 15th, and again, not received particularly well. But I think it is doing better. That was one thing I meant to mention about Assetto Corsa Evo 2, a game that's not super well received on Steam, but recently it has upticked to mostly positive. So that may give me a reason to step over and check it out. But yeah, Escape from Tarkov, not super well received, but still doing good numbers after a pretty slow start. I haven't got a chance to check out Tokyo Extreme Racer, but this is a game that is well received on Steam as well. So nice to see it popping in. PGA Tour 2K25, which is a game that I think you saw some rolling footage of before that I play. Again, nice to see it breaking out. It broke out somewhere else in sales. I think I saw it on the MPD charts a number of times throughout the year. It was really surprising. Again, I don't think golf is a super huge, genre. So good to see it doing commercially well. Titan Quest 2, which is still in early access. So a favorite franchise of mine. Nice to see it up there. And Dawn of War, probably one of my favorite RTSs of all time. And I think this is the collection. Yeah, the definitive edition. And I think I want to say is a precursor to new Dawn of War games that I think are coming out. I can't remember. I don't think it's Relic. Oh, it is Relic who did it. And Relic is one of my top 5 favorite studios of all time. So, again, nice to see it up there. Spiritual fan favorite choices. Nice to see Jump Space up there. Jump Space looks super interesting to me. It does not have HOTAS FCS flight control system support, and so I haven't been interested in jumping on it. This is a game that, for me personally, for me to play the game, I really need to have a setup where what's supported is a flight control system, so I can have my joysticks and stuff when I'm in the ship. But then when I jump out to first-person shooter, I can go to mouse and keyboard, which is how I play Star Citizen. So really kind of needs to do that for me. The Alters, which is a game that I bought, but I haven't played through. I just played the first few hours of it. But nice to see it popping into the chart. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, surprising, again, not very well critically well received. So surprising to see it here in the chart. And got a lot of negative sentiment from the market. So really surprising that it made it into the chart. Very interesting that this K-drama FMV game Revenge on Gold Diggers also popped to the chart. I don't know what that's about, but there it is. That's the quirkiness of Steam. Fortunately we're not seeing any hentai sex simulator games up here in the charts because there's lots of that out on Steam as well. So I thought that was kind of just interesting to talk through from a what's on the market and what's going on the PC side as well. Let's move on to some quick hits in the final segment of the show. Hey, what's up, everybody? What's up, everybody? Let's move on to the last segment of the show. I just want to do some quick hits because, there's actually been quite a lot of news for this first couple weeks of the year. Not enough time to unpack all of it. I didn't realize that this episode is already teetering towards an hour and a half, so we'll go ahead and wrap things up. But I did want to kind of talk about a couple things. One was a news story over on Windows Central by Rebecca Spear. Here's why you won't see HP gaming laptops anymore. Thankfully, this change makes a whole lot of sense. I don't necessarily entirely agree with Rebecca, but the point is that the news story is that HP is not retiring the Omen brand, but combining it. And so now the branding on this will be if it's an Omen device, will be HyperX Omen. I don't know. I guess maybe I get the sense that's actually a business internal reorg, in that the P&L center for Omen is actually moving underneath HyperX management. And so I think it's actually less of a branding thing than, like I said, internal shuffle. Because the branding thing, I don't really think makes a difference. And when you talk about the legacy of the Omen brand, I think this is probably a lot of, thing that a lot of, people who aren't PC gamers don't know. So Omen was a previous boutique configurator, the brand of which HP bought. I think HP bought not Velocity Micro, but there was some brand that started with a V that I think they bought also. But at any rate, and HyperX is actually a brand that they bought from Kingston. Used to be mistaken. I used to think that they had bought Kingston, but they actually didn't. Kingston still is a standalone business entity that, has its own SSD and RAM line that it continues to do. I think one other major product that they do. And so this was HP, kind of making off with their gaming stuff, which is kind of a tactic that we see also from Logitech in a lot of cases, where they've bought the Mad Catz brand, which brought SciTech along with it, and they bought Streamlabs, and they actually bought Blue, the microphone maker, and so a lot of these larger gaming companies are kind of gobbling up some of these smaller brands to put them under a singular gaming umbrella. But at any rate, they're basically taking their HyperX line and combining it with Omen. Does it make sense? I think if you're a PC gamer who understands that legacy of the Omen brand, intermixing it with HyperX doesn't really do anything positive. In my mind, Omen had previously been, when I put things on brands on a quality scale of who makes high end nice hardware and who makes kind of, I won't say Mad Catz level hardware, but hardware that HyperX makes some good stuff, and I absolutely use some HyperX gear. I use the HyperX Cloud 2, I think, headset, and actually the higher end one, the HyperX Cloud Alpha headset, which is a headset that has something ridiculous, 200 hours of battery life. And I really like that stuff. I actually really like their keyboards. They just don't make a wireless keyboard in this hyper specific form factor that I like, which is like the 70 to 75% form factor, but that breaks out like the insert home page up delete keys like on an island with the cursor keys. They don't make one like that, so it's a little too compact for me. But like there's lots of HyperX stuff. The HyperX Pulse or Pulsefire and Haste previously used to kind of be my go-to mouse of choice before I moved over to Logitech Wireless. So, HyperX definitely makes some good stuff. I don't think of them as like a top tier quality brand. I think of that more in Corsair, mainly. Although, Corsair has some issues with software where I don't particularly like their stuff as much anymore either. Like I said, I'm baselining a lot of my gaming gear now around Logitech, and I also really like SteelSeries. Who I think, so, when I think of like top tier, like quality brands, I think more Corsair and SteelSeries. I kind of think of HyperX as kind of, middle tier to just a skosh above middle tier. The Omen brand I used to think of as like a higher quality brand, and even though there's people who don't like Omen gear, I still think of Omen gear as good. I put it above like Lenovo's Legion line in my mind. So I don't necessarily know that combining it with HyperX like really does a lot. I think for a lot of PC gamers who look at the Omen brand as a viable option and value prop, may look at like that as a downgrade when you combine Omen with HyperX. So I don't know that it makes as much sense. I'm sure that internally, from a business perspective or from a P&L perspective, it probably makes absolute sense to get those two things in the same revenue center. But, that is what it is. The good thing is that when I saw this news story, I thought the Omen brand was going away. And from somebody who just kind of has nostalgia and likes like those legacy brands, it doesn't I still lament like the Cytec brand going away. Fortunately, quite honestly, Cytec gear, which I had a lot of fear about when it was purchased by Logitech, it has not gone in the crapper. So I'm glad to see that that those products are still good. I still use lots of flight control systems and HOTAS that from a legacy perspective actually come from the Cytec legacy pipeline. This other news story, I mentioned this in one of the other segments. 007 First Light unveils partnership with NVIDIA and official PC system requirements. I won't go through the PC system requirements again, but I will go through the additional specific vector of the NVIDIA partnership. The game will support NVIDIA DLSS4 with multi-frame generation. Again, that's something for somebody who has an RTX 5080 is very happy to hear. I assume DLSS4 will also be on the 4000 series. I also have the 4080 into 4070 Supers, but I haven't pulled that thread specifically. But the game will support NVIDIA DLSS4 with multi-frame generation, which IO Interactive said in a statement is essential to realize the studio's vision for PC experience. Chief Technical Officer Ulas Karatamir stated. I'm trying to see... in a video, we could see the game running at up to nearly 300 frames per second. We don't know the hardware that was being used, but it's safe to assume it was a GeForce RTX 5090. We also don't know if the brand new 6x multi-frame generation mode revealed at CES 2026 is enabled in those scenes or not. Given that the update is slated to launch in spring, and 007 First Light is also now planned for May 27th, we can, however, be confident that it will be supported in the final game. So I think those are the specifics that I wanted to add on to the news brief that I did earlier. And this last quick hit, Larian would have loved Baldur's Gate 3 on Switch 2. We'll definitely consider Divinity. The Baldur's Gate 3 thing I'm less worried about. Quite honestly, I find Baldur's Gate to be a questionable premise on console at all. So the notion of it coming to the Switch 2 is not something I would be jumping up and down about. What I found most interesting was this Divinity thing. And this comes out of, they did an AMA and Ask Me Anything on Reddit. I want to say, I think yesterday, so maybe earlier on Friday the 10th, or Friday the 9th of January, I'm not sure. Let's see. Larian Studios, the developer behind the Game of the Year winning RPG from 2023, held a Reddit AMA earlier today, mainly focusing on its upcoming Divinity title, which was revealed at the Game Awards 2025. And as you'd expect, one fan asked about the potential of a Switch 2 port of the latest Baldur's Gate game. Like I said, I'm not going to go through that. In more positive news regarding the new Divinity game, Larian is potentially considering a Switch 2 version of that title. Another user asked about this while praising the recent Divinity Original Sin 2 Switch 2 upgrade, which came out in December 2025. So I was not aware that it had been upgraded on the Switch 2 baseline. Divinity Original Sin 2 is a game that I have on the Switch, and so that's one that I will look at. I've gone back and installed Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild Switch 2 updates. I have not played them yet. I think I maybe booted the Tears of the Kingdom one, but those are some things I need to check out. But I will check out this Divinity Original Sin 2 upgrade. Technical Director Bert replied, "We love the platform, and we will certainly consider Switch 2 for the next Divinity game. So it sounds like the Switch 2 is firmly on mind for the team at Larian." And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Gaming Outside the Algorithm, episode number 3, which I think will probably actually get posted today on Saturday, the 10th of January, ahead of the 11th January date that I talked about. So thanks so much for anybody who happens to swing by and watch this archive pre-recorded version on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. If you do come by, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you could just receive a notification whenever I post new content. I say that, as I often mention, I say that not for the purposes of monetization. I don't monetize any of my social media outlets, the only one of which I'm actually participating in is YouTube. That is just for you and your convenience. I would like you to come by and watch the video, and I think it increases the convenience because I don't put these things out on a regular schedule, so I think it helps you out if you get the YouTube notification or the alert that I've posted new content. So that's why, I asked for the like and the recommend, or the like in the subscription. So until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games that you like, and come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. That show airs Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.
Life is what you made. I feel like I'm lazy. I can't see a way out. I've been second face down off canvases I paint. I just spent the rain day on drip I can't afford, but that's the price I pay for the memories I'm making. I've been going places. I've been shaking hands for a chance to really make it. This life is so crazy, so I almost gave it. All this that I'm laying, it's only the foundation. I've been going crazy, trying to find a way. I was in the basement, trying to turn the page. I was going through a phase. Nobody see my face. I was chasing at the paper, and all the fear ways. Everything again, and I didn't let them loose. I've been breaking rules, I've been making moves, but everything to prove. Now it's going how I see it through my lens, but it's stuck in my head. I can't seem to get away from it. I went out of my way. I'm trying to feel the again. I lost some weight.